So narrative medicine is a huge part of our program now. I was just in Miami. I just got back from Miami, which is why I'm so tan. I'm not normally this tan. No. Um, I just got back from Miami, and one of the keynote speakers, who's the top person for public health in New York State, young physician, young woman, bright, intelligent. She spent about half the time of her keynote talking about narrative. She happens to have affiliation with Columbia, which has a narrative medicine program, but more significantly, uh, with conversations about narrative medicine, narrative humility, which means listening to the stories of other people and taking their stories seriously and trying to help them resolve health issues or other personal issues, are becoming prominent. It's a really important emerging conversation. And so, on some level, I would say that SPU has a narrative driven program. We're focusing more and more on narrative, and not only in terms of thinking about patients or populations, but also in terms of the student reflecting on their own narrative, past and present, as they engage the clinical environment, and also the social justice work that they're going to be doing among the marginalized, and then reflecting deeply upon that and thinking about, first of all, whether or not they're called to continue this kind of service, and then second of all, if they what particular demographic or disease or whatever they're called to engage if they are in fact called to healthcare. So this particular video is going to be fascinating and really interesting to me.
We are therefore consistently exposed to two dangers in the study of man. We may, on one hand, see nothing more than the natural being, and thus remain blind to the constant reverberation of his spiritual life upon his natural development. On the other hand, we may see only the spiritual being, and thus ignore the role of his natural life. Thus we doctors who, in the healing of diseases, perceive only the natural animal in their client. They treat him as if they were veterinarians, quite oblivious to the constant influence of spiritual life upon health. Inversely, we see spiritual leaders who condemn any recourse to scientific medicine. They show in this way that they've forgotten that man, as God has made him, is part of nature, subject to its laws and curable by natural means. Man does not have two lives, natural and supernatural. He has only one, his real life. The spiritual life is not made up of a few exceptional events, but of the whole of life, to which it gives meaning. Life is meaningless if it is but a blind series of phenomena. God leaves us both by nature and by his calls. He accomplishes his plan by natural means as well as by those which we call supernatural. Paul Toyner, The Seasons of Life.
Hello!
Oh, hello. Thanks for coming today for this
Yeah.
great opportunity.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Really excited to interview you about narrative medicine.
Yeah, I'm ready to talk.
What do you think is the most important skill that a doctor should have when interacting with patients?
I mean, there's, of course, the general knowledge of medicine and the body, and that's obviously important. You go to 4 years of medical school for that. But I think something that's just as important is the humanity, the human side of medicine.
So basically you're telling me that listening is very important for you.
So something I noticed is that you really have to walk into the exam room with humility. You can't walk in there acting like you know everything. You do have that knowledge gap between you and the patient, but your job as a doctor is to be able to bridge that gap. So it's about patient education, patient care. Because once you have that, you're establishing trust with your patient. You want to be sure that they feel comfortable telling you their story. And it's stories that allow you to figure out what's wrong with the patient. Because if they're not going to tell you the whole story, then you might not figure out what exactly is the underlying cause.
So, as Rita Karen says in her book, Narrative Medicine, a scientifically competent medicine alone can't help a patient grapple with the loss of health and help them find meaning in illness and dying. And that's why we focus so much on narrative medicine at Seattle Pacific University. It's not just the medicine that counts. It's not just doing well in your biochemistry classes or your organic chemistry or your neurobiology, but it's getting proximate to other people. It's listening to their stories and finding truth in their stories and listening to their narratives and growing with them so that you can provide competent care. Patients and caregivers enter into sickness and healing with their whole bodies, their lives, their families, their beliefs, values, histories, hopes for the future. And so that's reflected in the simple and complicated stories they tell one another. As future medical professionals, we are in the perfect position to advocate for our patients. So being a doctor comes with power and comes with prestige and comes with the responsibility to help those who cannot necessarily help themselves. The mission here at Seattle Pacific University is to engage the culture and change the world. The scientific classes here give us the skills to be competent physicians, but PPHS reminds us of the ministry of listening. This means empathetic and effective care for individual patients and candid self-reflection, both of which lead to a rich, resonant grasp of another person's situation as it unfolds in time. And this allows us to have responsible societal discourse about health policy. And that is how we're going to change the world.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.